are either the best thing that's ever happened to humanity or the technology that will ultimately lead to its demise. Like most things in life, the truth is a little bit more complicated, and the future will depend very much on the decisions we make today. The next speakers are at the forefront of these decisions and this debate. Please welcome to the stage, in conversation with the Hill's Steve Clemons, we have Grishin Robotics founder Dmitry Grishin, the founder of In Sitro, Daphne Koller, and Canada's Minister for Science and Innovation, Navdeep Bains.
Hey folks, you ready for a fun time? Let's talk about whether our future is going to be great or whether it's going to be a dystopian nightmare. Our job today is to talk about who's afraid of automation, a world where everything is connected, science is advancing, and it reminds me of a cover story in 2001 by Bill Joy on the cover of Wired magazine titled, "Does the Future Need Us?" And so let me start with you, Mr. Minister, because you've just launched today, or this week, a digital charter. And so is there a place for human beings in a world of interconnected everything, algorithms for everything? Where do we as humans, where does this audience fit into the future?
Well, the short answer is yes, and our government
believes
that.
That's way too simple.
Well, I'm an optimist.
And don't be politically correct.
No, not at all. And it's not about being politically correct. It's just about being very forthcoming about our government's view when it comes to automation, artificial intelligence, and where do humans fit into that. I mean, this is something we hear about often. When I'm in my community, when I'm doing town halls, when I'm engaging with my neighbors, this is a point of conversation that comes up in many different ways. And fundamentally, we as a government are very optimistic about technology, very optimistic about artificial intelligence, and we believe Canada has played a leadership role, and we want to continue to make those investments. But we cannot and should not underestimate the anxieties that are out there, particularly when it comes to what does this mean for my job, what does it mean for my kids and their future prospects as well. And so when we put forward our new smart industrial policy, it was the innovation and skills plan. We want to see innovation, we want to see technology, we want to see growth in jobs. None of that would be possible without skills. In the last 3-4 budgets that we put in particular the last 4 budgets, has been a major focus on skills and lifelong learning and education. And one small example to demonstrate our commitment to really thinking long-term is investing in coding. And it's not simply about coding or algorithms, it's about digital skills, digital literacy, having young people at a very young age being able to connect with technology in a positive way. And so those are the kinds of investments we're making. And of course, somebody's driving a truck who's in their 40s, mid-career, and they're trying to figure out what to do. We've invested a lot in reskilling and upskilling as well. So this is the way we view the future. We recognize that technology is going to change things, jobs are going to be different, new jobs are going to emerge. And what do we do as a government? Be optimistic, come up with a plan, and really focus on skills, retraining, and education.
Daphne, let me ask you the same question in a slightly different way. At In Sitro, you're engaged now in bringing artificial intelligence and various quantitative methods and tools to drug development. And so you're connecting right there, people to science in some way. But I know that you were worried, we had a chat offline, about not being ready for the impacts and that we can't stick our head in the sand about the displacement that could be coming. So I'd just like you to give us a kind of no BS approach to what we should be doing to deal with those impacts that are coming down the way.
No, I think the impacts are going to be considerable. We're going to see a lot of people losing their jobs in categories where people wouldn't have envisioned that job loss is likely. I think people are used to thinking about jobs at the lowest tier of the economy as the ones that are most likely to be disrupted. But what we're actually starting to see right now are jobs that have typically called on people with education, often college education, that are all many of which are going to go away in the coming years. And we need to prepare our workforce for a new world that not only requires a new set of skills, but maybe I would even say meta-level skills, where the skill that you need the most most is the skill to learn new skills as new categories of jobs disappear and other ones emerge. And I think that's a category that by and large we have stopped, I'm not even sure if we've ever started really investing in teaching people how to learn new skills.
Right.
We're used to teaching people lots and lots of facts. Well, in a world where you just Google for something and the fact is right there at the tips of your fingers, it's less about the facts and even about basic skills and more about how do we learn new stuff all along. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the work that we're doing at Coursera, because it gives you at least the content for those new skills as they emerge all the time. And what we need is to get more people to engage in that kind of lifelong learning.
So for those of you who don't know, Daphne Koller was a co-founder of Coursera, which created in my book a much more nimble set of opportunities, not only for learning, but credentialing. And it really opened up the world. 80%, as I understand it, of Coursera courses are being taken by people outside of North America.
That's right. And
so it's an
40%
enormous footprint there.
And 40% in the developing world, which I think is just a remarkable opportunity in countries that don't really have a well-developed education system.
So before I jump to Dmitry, let me ask you to ask the ministers, or to address the ministers. The ministers issued this, this plan, this digital charter, and there are 10 pillars to it, as I understand.
Correct.
And you've worked with governments, and I can tell you you're like no nonsense, let's hit the goal and target. What do you think governments most often get wrong when they're doing these things? What would you advise him to be careful of in setting up an efficacious plan?
So first of all, maybe a couple things. One is that it's about the meta-level skills, so that's one thing that governments often don't get right. And then the other is incentives. I mean, it's really difficult to get people who have a full life with kids and a mortgage and a job and so on to stick to a learning plan, even if they know in their minds that it's going to get them to where they need to go. Life just constantly gets in the way. And so one of the best partnerships that we've had was with the government of Singapore, where they really set in place incentives that encourage people to complete a course of training and really get people to the level where they have enough of that base to make use of those skills in the real jobs. And so I think the incentives for people to actually engage in this is one of the things that governments really don't think about.
No, and I appreciate that advice, and it's actually the way we developed the charter. We actually took our time. We were very thoughtful about it. We engaged Canadians, experts, academia, business leaders, different communities before we unveil this, because it requires all hands on deck. And so just in terms of how we operate as a government, first of all, we consult extensively. Governments don't have all the answers. We don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And more importantly, solutions require collaboration, and it requires the public-private partnership model to move forward. So that's what this charter represents. It really is a reflection of what we heard. And on education, I think if you look at our last budget, it clearly demonstrates exactly that commitment that you highlighted. We put forward a training benefit. And the idea of this training benefit, along with our employment insurance plan, is to allow people the time off work.
That's great.
And also, like you said, the incentives, and also the financial support of $1,000. And coupled with other initiatives, it's even higher than that. Very much similar to what Singapore did.
That's great.
And so, we hear you loud and clear, and this is a commitment that we've made. It really is a focus on people. Artificial intelligence, we launched a new panel. It's human-centric. Again, anything we talk about, we can't lose sight. Technology is great, but it's about people. And that's how we focus our policy and how we develop policy.
Dmitry, thank you for that. Dmitry, I want you to share with the audience how you see the future. We spent some time together, and you're Mr. Robotics, not Mr. Robot, but Mr. Robotics, and you think about all the great things that you think robots can bring to enhance our world, enhance our lives, enhance our doing. And I'm going to ask you to do the same thing for the Minister Bains here. How is his life going to change?
We never planned this, by the way.
I can imagine, you remember that old TV show, Mr. Minister? What does the future Mr. Minister look like with robots all around? Give us some insight into what you think is possible.
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting work coming. And I try to think how it can change our life day to day. And if you can look in the past, we already have one generation of automatization coming at the beginning of 20th century. And if you remember this past, we have 6 days we work in per week. And then people shift to 5 days. So my bet, I don't know if it will be how quick it will come, but next 5 years, we'll slowly be moving to 4 days a week working. right? So we have three-day weekend, and 4 days we're working. What's this mean? It means that it's will adapt and people will change somehow. Like if you have more weekends, people can spend more time doing education, spend more time doing entertainment. And of course, it will change also like how we operate, right?
So you don't see the impacts of people having to be displaced. You think the quality of life they have will be enhanced. And because there are a lot of folks that don't buy that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a guy named Steve Hilton. He's a conservative commentator on Fox News. He was a pro-Brexit commentator, and he wrote a book called More Human from the perspective of the political right, saying progress is a bad word. You know, as we automate, as we connect too much, we need to actually put people back in the middle of this. It's a very interesting argument to come from the right. And so I'm interested in how you would respond to that comment that many people, particularly in populist political movements today, are having a problem with this kind of rosy kumbaya picture of us all getting a lot more time for a 3-day weekend.
I think, first of all, it should be a balanced view. We should not go too far at the right, too far to the left. Definitely, we already see it many times before in the past. Computing is coming, automatization, factories coming, so humans is adapting, for sure. And I think the biggest question is how we'll adapt, right? What kind of rules we need to change, how we'll be improving our life, and I think it will be day-to-day discussions and found right and best approach. I don't think we know the exact set of rules how we'll operate in future. It's more like I like programming, and we do a lot of beta testing. So I think we as a human beings still need to do a lot of tests and see what's coming, how it will change.
So let me ask you a big question here. I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about you for a moment. You were born on a Soviet military base.
Yes.
Your dad was a radar developer for MiG-29s, and that's a very different world. And so you have a Russian background. You live in the Bay Area now.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, if Russia and or China are setting the normative standards for how we all work with machines in the future, do you worry about that? Do you worry about your homeland? Do you worry about China? Or do you think that what Canada's done today, maybe what the transatlantic relationship, U.S., that there's just a battle that seems to be out there about values and norms, and what you do with like facial recognition software and AI and all of the stuff that can be that can advance mankind, it can also control mankind. And so I'm interested in your comments on Russia.
I think overall, again, I try to appeal to the past. If you have big new progress coming, I don't know, auto manufacturing coming for the market, different countries have different approach. Some adopt some rules earlier, some adopt rules later.
Right.
And I think we'll see different approach in different countries. And what we as human beings should learn different countries' approach, see how it works. So,
which country scares you the most?
I think countries who do nothing.
Countries who what?
Who do nothing. Who really do. I think we need to adopt new technology. We need to test, and of course we need to react. Like let's go to the examples. We have a lot of new technology, like computers coming. I remember in year 2000, people discussed, it is some kind of bug in software. I think it's year 2000 problem. And people were scared that we have a lot, that all computers will be shut down, we need to have different regulations, but we figure out how to deal with it, right? So I think we just need to learn different approaches, try to see what works, what not work, and work out, adapt. And also I think that we sometimes to focus on short term, but long term, people will find the way and solution. So I'm not so pessimistic about it.
Daphne, can I ask you the same question, really through maybe another door that I would call the trust door? Because right now, and I know that this is something that Navdeep is working on, how do you get the equities right so that you've got an environment, an ecosystem that people have access to data, but people can trust the data. So trust is a key piece of this equation. I mean, given your own experience and all of the challenges you've had in building structures, how do you get the trust piece of this right at scale as we begin thinking about how we advance forward, because there are a lot of people who are going to be displaced, and so you're already having a collapse of trust to a certain degree by a substantial portion of the population.
I think it's really about educating people about the technology and what its real strengths and limitations are. And I think there is a lot of people out there making statements that are really not substantiated by facts. I hear statements all the time about, oh, in 5 years we're going to have computers that are at human level intelligence. If you talk to people who are actually in the field, experts in the field, there isn't a single one, I think, that will endorse that statement. This is, I don't know when that's going to be, but there's so many key problems that have not yet been solved in order to get to that level of intelligence. And I think it's the responsibility of those of us who actually understand the technology to take control of the dialogue and say, this is what the reality is, and we need to learn how to deal with it. I don't think we can do the ostrich putting its head in the sand and pretend that the change isn't coming, because that's not going to benefit us at all. You're not going to put this genie back in the bottle. And to your Steve Hilton example, it's not the right approach to say, oh, progress is bad, so we need to stop making progress. You can't do that. No, it's never worked. And the only thing that you can do, that you get by doing that, is to have other players who might not be as responsible moving further ahead while you fall further behind. And I'm really glad that Canada has elected not to take that route. I think what we need to do is to move as fast as possible forward in terms of the technology, while at the same time being really responsible in how that's being used, and educating the public to understand that those hyperbolic predictions, be they the world is coming to an end, or we're going to download our brains into machines in 5 years and the world is going to be utopia, none of these are true.
Before I jump to Navdeep, do you see any models out there, Daphne, of partnerships between government and industry and education that's getting it really, really right? Like there's an important show and tell moment that we can look at. Maybe it is Coursera, but do you see institution structures or partnerships out there that you think are that they should be emulated?
So I mentioned earlier the government of Singapore, which is now, I think, a model that the government of Canada is adopting. I think that Coursera is a great example of a public-private partnership where non-profit academic institutions have partnered with Coursera, which has subsequently then partnered with employers to retrain a lot of employees with the kind of education that has not really been available to people who are already in the workforce once they've finished their course of study. So I think these have been more bottoms-up efforts that have emerged organically from a bunch of individual pairwise partnerships, and maybe that's a good approach, because I think when you try and legislate sort of complex, sort of Rube Goldberg constructs of multiple organizations all working together, these consortia just become unwieldy and complex, whereas letting organizations kind of find natural partnerships with the right set of incentives for everyone involved seems to generally work better, I think.
Navdeep, let me ask you the question about trust, because I know it's really fundamental to what you've tried to put forward. How do you know when you've succeeded with your digital charter and getting the public back in the game to not fear the future, but yet you're not trying to fool them either?
Well, there's many different metrics. One of the metrics that really raised this issue for us as a government, the reason we acted, was 90% of Canadians have less confidence in their privacy today than they did 10 years ago. They feel that the data that they have, they don't have control over, who's using their data, for what purposes, and they're really concerned about their privacy. So there's clearly public polling data that shows that erosion of trust. And so clearly one indicator of success would be, how do we reverse that trend? But if I can just take a step back to your earlier point when you talked about Russia and China, we are in a global innovation race. Progress is not something we actually have a choice about.
Yeah.
Right.
Status quo is not actually an option.
Exactly.
To the point that Dmitry made, countries that want to kind of go back or stick with the status quo fundamentally are hurting their ability to compete going forward. Mm-hmm. And so for us as a minister also responsible for economic development and the economy here in Canada, the issue of trust is to empower Canadians to make sure that they actually control their data, but it's also a competitiveness issue. How do we provide predictability and a framework for businesses? So when we put these principles forward now, businesses understand what direction government's heading in, and that way this provides that level of predictability, but also a competitive advantage. How do we differentiate ourselves versus China or Russia? We have a system here built on trust. People understand what our laws are, how they operate, there's clear enforcement mechanisms in place, proper accountability and transparency. And I think in the long run, that will enable us to succeed in a lot more technology more quickly. And the other thing I would highlight is we got to focus on the good as well. So artificial intelligence, AI for good, or data for good. Yesterday I announced here at Sunnybrook, a hospital not too far from here, where they're investing, and we co-invested with them, where they're using MRI, imagery, CT scans, and they're using data for that for early diagnosis for cancer. And when you tell patients that, when you tell families that when you go to a hospital now, because of artificial intelligence, because of data, because of a public-private partnership, you're actually going to be better off, better quality of life, that has impact. So I think we got to start talking about those aspects as well, not simply about some of the challenges that exist, but really where the opportunities are as well.
Well, this is a point that Eric Schmidt, previously of Google and Alphabet, says that, I asked him once, I said, how do you think people will be seduced to embrace AI? And he said two ways. He said, one, identity theft and fraud and fixing that problem. And the second is better health outcomes. And so both of these will be strategies that warm up the field. But I guess as we get near the end of our
on that point, very quickly, this is the holy grail right here in Canada. It's not only healthcare in terms of better outcomes, but if you look at this room, we have the entire world here. This kind of data set with this kind of diversity is really special and unique. And so we're very mindful of that as well in terms of the opportunities that exist, in terms of not only us demonstrating data or AI for good, but really leveraging our diversity to do that.
So I'm interested in we'll start with you, Dmitry, just go very quickly in the couple of minutes we still have. I mean, I have been so impressed I'm impressed every time I go to either Web Summit or Collision or Rise. I go to the booths, I listen to people in there, oftentimes crazy, cool ideas, and I'm interested in how we have a lot of people listening and watching. What do you think the role, if we call this civil society here, what are the proactive things that this community can do to help make this a good story and not a bad story? I mean, I didn't start off facetiously. We're having this topic today because there are people who are very fearful of what's coming up, that an internet of everything connected is a world where people begin to feel lost, not connected to some degree. And so I'm interested in what your insights would be for the folks, the innovators, the investors in this room. Dmitry?
So maybe it's not very popular idea right now, but I believe in globalization. I think if you bring people from different places like Collision doing,
you're allowed to believe in globalization in California.
No, I think fundamentally, I think it's a great idea for human beings. We need to learn from each other and adapt the best practice, and this is what globalization is doing.
Right.
I don't like what direction right now our world is moving, but I think anything we can do to facilitate this globalization, especially in the current political environment, make anything which make ideas shareable from all of the places. You'll surprise how much innovation happening from Russia, from China, from Korea, from many other places.
Right.
And a lot of these ideas can be adapted in different places. So I think we should, especially now, do much more in this direction.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Daphne.
Very quickly, two things. First of all, I'd like to pick up on the AI for good. I think it's a shame that so many of the applications of machine learning are used for selling ads on the internet or even for e-commerce. I think we should have a lot more machine learning for the purpose of social good. And the second thing, I think we need to give people control over their own data so that they know what's being done with the data that's collected around them. People might choose in certain contexts, like in the healthcare context, to make their data available so that it can help research and help cure more people, but they might not choose to make their data available to Cambridge Analytica for targeting political ads. And I think giving people control will greatly increase the trust that they have and make the world better.
And Mr. Minister, final word.
Yeah, I know I've got like a few seconds. So bottom line from our perspective as a government, it's really about putting people first. If it's AI, talked about again the benefits for people. Data, again, what are the benefits for people? Even our economic policy focuses on the skills before the innovation. So fundamentally, I think the message for people here is it's got to be human-centric. It's got to revolve around people. We got to think about how this will impact them, and then from there develop ideas, strategies, and business models.
Well, I want to thank all of you. Navdeep Bains, Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. You have the coolest title in the cabinet, I'm sure. Daphne Koller, co-founder of Coursera and Incitra, and Dmitry Grishin of Grishin Robotics. Thank you very much for this deep dive. I'm glad they brought this topic to our conversation. Thank you all.